I arrived at my son Elliot's estate with a heavy heart, wearing a navy blue dress I'd saved for the occasion. The drive to Willow Creek was lined with vintage streetlights, and from the road, I could already hear the soft strums of a bluegrass band signaling the grandeur of the celebration. It was his 40th birthday, and I felt proud watching him succeed, though a quiet unease tightened my chest. I parked on the gravel driveway and took a deep breath before crossing the main entrance, framed by blooming hydrangeas that my late husband, Henry, would have loved. The grand hall looked like a snapshot from a southern summer, warm string lights draped across the beams, the scent of barbecue ribs mingling with sweet iced tea, and the local elite toasting as if life were flawless. Yet, from the moment I stepped in, something chilled me. Elliot greeted me with a quick peck on the cheek, avoiding my eyes, and excused himself to mingle with guests. My daughter, Clara, kept her distance, leaning toward a suited man with a leather briefcase I didn't recognize. Whispers, sidelong glances, and a nervous twitch in her hands made me feel like a stranger in what was once my own family. I approached the table where my glass of iced tea sat. I smiled at a couple of neighbors from Savannah who greeted me kindly, and that's when I felt a gentle tug at my skirt. I looked down. My 11-year-old grandson, Noah, was pale as a ghost. "Grandma, you need to leave," he whispered, barely audible. The world seemed to freeze. I crouched down, confused. "What's that?" "Sweetheart." Noah was trembling, his eyes glassy with fear. "Please, we have to go now." Instinctively, I glanced around for answers and caught Clara subtly swapping my glass for another while chatting with the man with the briefcase. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't ask questions. I took Noah's hand, which gripped mine tightly, and with steady steps, we slipped through a side hallway to the back door. The cool air off the creek hit my face as we crossed the lantern-lit garden, each heartbeat pounding like the rhythm of an escape I didn't fully understand. I opened the service gate, and we hurried to the car without looking back, my mind swirling with questions I wasn't ready to face. Driven by the need to protect my life and Noah's, the car's engine hummed as a light drizzle tapped the windshield in an almost hypnotic rhythm. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to steady my shaking hands. Noah sat silently beside me until he suddenly broke into choked sobs that tore at my heart. "I heard Dad and Aunt Clara," he said, voice quivering. "They want to make you look crazy." A knot twisted in my stomach. I glanced at him, his cheeks flushed and eyes brimming with fear. "Make me look crazy." "Noah," I whispered, dreading his answer. "They were talking about bringing in a doctor." He took a deep breath, but not a real one. Someone who'd say in front of everyone that you have dementia. They were going to record it, and then have you locked away. A chill coursed through me. The image of Clara swapping my glass in the hall took on a sinister new meaning. And they said, when you were gone, they'd take Grandpa's house and your money. My heart pounded as if it might burst. I suddenly recalled the past few weeks, Elliot's persistent calls urging me to sign a power of attorney just in case. Clara's visits with documents she never left in my hands for long. I had always trusted my children, but now the pieces formed a chilling puzzle. I kept my eyes on the road as the wipers swept away the rain. A quick check in the rearview mirror confirmed no one was following us. Relief flickered, tinged with raw fear. I took a slow breath and squeezed Noah's hand. "Thank you for telling me." "Noah," I managed, my voice breaking. "We won't let them hurt us." He nodded, wiping tears with his sleeve, and rested his head against the seat, drained by the ordeal. I drove on without a clear destination, each mile pulling us further from a trap already in motion. As the rain fell, I realized I had to act fast because what I'd heard wasn't just a child's fear, but the first thread of a carefully woven betrayal. I drove aimlessly for a while, the rain blurring the streetlights into hazy streaks. Fear gave way to a hollow ache in my chest. That's when memories began to flood in, as if my mind was piecing together how we'd ended up here. After Henry's death, my life changed more than I cared to admit. For years, Sundays in Savannah had been sacred, the table laden with fried chicken, collard greens, and the sound of Henry chuckling as he poured sweet tea. But after we buried him, those dinners faded. The first week after the funeral, Elliot stopped by briefly, clutching a bouquet with a distant look. The next, Clara called to say she was swamped with work. Too much going on. Mom, within 3 months, Sundays became a solitary ritual. When they did visit, the conversations shifted. Elliot always steered toward money, my savings, the property taxes, pending insurance policies, and Clara repeated a phrase that now felt like a veiled threat dressed as concerned mom. A big house by the creek is risky for a woman alone. I recalled one fall afternoon, the sun filtering lazily through the shutters. Exhausted, I dozed off in the living room armchair, half asleep. I cracked an eye and saw Clara leaning over the dining table, phone in hand, discreetly photographing the deed to the house I'd left out after reviewing papers. I pretended to stay asleep. She pocketed her phone and slipped out quietly. That moment hit me like a dagger. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme. It was a plan my own children had been weaving for months, maybe years. With the patience of those waiting for the perfect moment to strike, I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling something break inside me forever. As the car moved through the creek's fog, I knew I had to brace myself to face my children's greed, because what they were willing to do was only beginning. We reached my stone house by the creek as night fell, the gentle lapping of water against the rocks used to bring me peace. But that night, each wave carried a whisper of menace. I opened the door, and for the first time since Henry built it, the house didn't feel warm. It felt like an unlocked cage. I turned on the living room lights and checked every window. Noah collapsed onto the couch, his small frame curled up, exhausted from the tension. I took a deep breath and dialed Arthur Grayson, the trusted lawyer who'd handled Henry's affairs in Savannah for years. His voice was steady, and after I recounted Noah's words, he paused briefly before responding. Eleanor, if this is true, they could declare you incapacitated and drain your accounts in weeks. I've seen cases like this. They always follow the same pattern. My fingers trembled as I held the phone. Hearing my fears voiced by someone experienced made them painfully real. We agreed to meet at his office the next day to explore options and protect my assets. I went upstairs with Noah to prepare the guest room. As I folded the sheets, he lingered in the doorway, eyes downcast. "Grandma," he whispered. "Dad was in the attic a few days ago. Said he was looking for important papers." My heart skipped. The attic held family photos, Henry's letters, and old copies of deeds and contracts, if they'd been digging there. This plan had been in motion for a while. I tucked Noah in, watching him drift off, clutching his stuffed bear. Back in the living room, I sat before the unlit fireplace, surrounded by memories that now felt like silent witnesses to betrayal. Suspicion wasn't enough to defend what was mine. I needed solid proof and a strategy my children wouldn't see coming. With that resolve, determination began to replace fear, and the first outline of a silent counterattack took shape in my mind. The next morning, Arthur arrived with a tall man whose calculating gaze and quiet movements marked him as a professional Vincent Hayes, a private investigator known for discretion and efficiency. The moment he stepped into my house, he scanned every corner like he was reading a map. Within an hour, He'd planted tiny microphones in the living room, kitchen, and hallway, plus a hidden camera watching the front door. I observed with a mix of fear and relief. My lifelong refuge had become the stage for a trap to uncover the truth. The following days were a haze of tension. Every creak of the floorboards made me hold my breath. Noah went to school as usual, unaware of the technical details but sensing my unease. Arthur called nightly to ensure everything was on track. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Clara stepped out unannounced, dressed in her usual polished coolness, strolling through the living room as if the house were already hers. She took a call right by one of the hidden mics. "Yeah, the doctor says if she feels dizzy today, we'll sign everything in 2 days," she said casually, like it was just another errand. My heart pounded like a drum. Hidden behind the hallway door, I held my breath as the recorder did its work. Those words were the proof I needed. That night, I checked my email, the one I occasionally shared with Elliot for family matters. Among the sent messages, I found notifications of bank transactions I hadn't authorized, small, seemingly harmless transfers that added up to a troubling sum. My own son had been using my accounts as if they were his. I shut down the computer, my hands ice cold. Between Clara's recording and the digital evidence, I had the first pieces of my defense. For the first time, fear began to morph into strategy, and the counteroffensive I'd envisioned was ready to take its first quiet step. Arthur listened to the recordings and reviewed the bank transactions I'd found. When he finished, his grave expression sent a chill through me. "Eleanor, it's time to take a risk," he said. "If we want to stop their plan and expose them, we need them to fall into their own trap." His idea was bold and dangerous: host a family meeting at my house, inviting not just Elliot and Clara, but also cousins, Lydia and Samuel, and 2 trusted neighbors as silent witnesses. It would be framed as an urgent talk about my health and the family's future. While they thought they were closing in on victory, we'd set the stage for their downfall, with Vincent's hidden cameras ready to capture every word. I agreed, my stomach in knots. That afternoon, I sent discreet invitations and called the neighbors who'd seen my loneliness up close in recent months. They didn't hesitate to back my plan. Walter, a retiree with a steady gaze, said firmly, "If your family's scheming like this, the whole neighborhood will know by night's end." His resolve steadied me, but the weight of the plan pressed harder. Returning from the post office, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, a handwritten note. "Don't trust anyone. Don't sign anything." I stood in the kitchen, note in hand, the air growing heavier. Was it a genuine warning from an ally or a veiled threat to scare me? My pulse quickened, uncertainty gnawing at my resolve. That night, despite brewing chamomile tea to calm my nerves, I couldn't sleep. The house's noises felt like whispers, every gust against the shutters conjuring watchful eyes in the dark. I paced the halls in my robe, checking Vincent's cameras, their tiny lenses my only shield. Between insomnia and tension, I knew the game was just beginning. In a few hours, I'd face everyone in a match with no turning back. My heart racing toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. The living room clock struck 7 when I heard a car pull up. I took a deep breath, clutching my tea mug, and opened the door. Elliot and Clara entered with forced smiles, followed by Dr. Coleman, carrying a black briefcase that seemed heavier than his conscience. They greeted the cousins and neighbors I'd invited, feigning warmth, though their eyes darted nervously around the room. We sat in a circle, like a casual family gathering. Clara took the lead with her usual sweet tone. the one she'd used as a child to charm me, Mom. "Do you remember what today is?" she asked, looking at me like I was a forgetful invalid. The witnesses exchanged uneasy glances. I smiled calmly. "Of course, dear. Today's the day you'll hear your own words." I pulled out the small speaker Arthur had given me and pressed play. Instantly, the room filled with my children's unmistakable voices. "If she feels dizzy today, we'll sign everything in 2 days. The doctor will say what we need, and then we'll have her committed." Silence fell like a hammer. Elliot paled. Clara blinked. Speechless. One neighbor half rose from his chair. Outraged. Dr. Coleman made a sudden move for the door, avoiding eye contact. But Vincent, watching from the hallway, stepped in firmly, with Walter joining to block his path. Arthur dialed his phone with steady calm. "Sheriff's office. We have an attempted fraud and evidence of a family conspiracy in progress." A massive weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, fear gave way to cold, clear resolve. I looked at my children, shrinking on the couch, caught in their own web, and knew the real decision was still ahead because humiliating them wasn't enough. I had to decide whether to cut the final thread tying me to them. The morning after the meeting, I walked into the Savannah courthouse with Arthur and Vincent, carrying a folder of evidence that felt heavier than my past. The recordings, bank transactions, and neighbors' testimonies were undeniable as I signed the complaint for attempted fraud and family abuse. I felt a mix of vertigo and liberation. Each stroke of my pen built a wall between me and those who'd tried to ruin me, a barrier forged from their own deceit. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The sheriff summoned Elliot and Clara to give statements. They left the station with ashen faces, chased by curious, judgmental stares from a community that once admired them. Dr. Coleman had no escape evidence of forgery, and conspiracy landed him in custody immediately. Knowing justice was moving brought me a peace I hadn't felt since Henry's death, a quiet assurance that truth could still prevail. That week, I sat with Arthur to revise my will. My hand didn't shake as I signed the new version my children were fully disinherited. Instead, I set up a secure education fund for Noah, ensuring his future would never hinge on his parents' greed. I also donated part of my estate to a senior care home in Savannah, where women like me had endured the quiet abandonment of their families, their stories echoing my own with the final signature. I felt no bitterness, just serene calm. I'd taken control of my life and legacy. That night, as Noah slept soundly in the guest room, I sat by the unlit fireplace, the silence no longer oppressive, my house transformed from a cage or battlefield into a true refuge, its walls holding my reclaimed strength. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salty creek air through an open window. The family wound was permanent, but my soul was beginning to heal. Yet, a small part of me wondered if a bridge could ever exist between us again, or if some betrayals were too deep to mend. Months passed before I could breathe without the shadow of betrayal on my shoulders. I sold the family estate, a place that had witnessed joyful dinners and the first signs of my children's greed, with Arthur handling the paperwork. I moved to a small house by Tybee Island, its garden bursting with blue hydrangeas swaying in the salty breeze. From the porch, I watched fishing boats return at dusk, their gentle ripples soothing the broken pieces of my heart. The coastal air carried a promise of renewal, whispering that I could start again. Noah became my constant companion. He attended a nearby school during the week, and weekends brought his stories, drawings, and laughter, breathing life into my new home. We cooked peach cobbler and biscuits together, the kitchen filled with the warm scent of butter and sugar. Some afternoons, We strolled the shore collecting seashells. His small hand in mine. With him, everything felt simple and true, as if the world still held corners free of pain. One day, I found an envelope in my mailbox with familiar handwriting. It was from Clara, sent from prison. My hands shook as I opened it. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just hope Noah doesn't forget us. I read the letter repeatedly, each word a mix of guilt and nostalgia that cut like a cold wind. Sitting on the porch, the sea before me, tears fell unchecked. My heart remained a mother's, but also a woman's who'd learned to protect herself. I tucked the letter into a drawer without replying, unsure if I'd ever find words to bridge that gap. That night, as Noah slept, I lit a candle and watched its flame dance in the window. My fractured, rebuilt life still sought closure, only time could grant. An inner whisper urged me toward the final step of my newfound freedom. A quiet resolve to live fully, unburdened by the past's weight. Over time, the tranquility of the coast became my ally. I decided my life couldn't just be about surviving betrayal. I opened a small bakery and sewing workshop in town, welcoming widows, retirees, and women with stories like mine. I taught them to make apple pies, pecan tarts, and to stitch aprons and tote bags, while we shared stories of protecting homes, savings, and dignity. The workshop became a haven, a place where wounds were mended with every stitch and recipe. Each afternoon, the air filled with the scent of sugar and fresh bread, mingled with the warmth of shared freedom. I saw in those women's eyes the same spark I'd fought to reclaim the certainty they could rebuild. Many arrived downcast, burdened by their pasts, and left smiling, a pie in one hand and my oft-repeated advice in the other. Never sign anything you don't understand. Your life is yours, not a gift for those who don't deserve it. Noah was my steadiest helper. After school, he'd bound in, sampling sweets and sweeping flour-dusted floors with a grin. One evening, as we walked the pier watching boats return in golden light, I said softly, I lost children, but gained freedom, and the truth that real love doesn't betray. He squeezed my hand silently, his small fingers anchoring me. In that moment, I knew my story needed one final turn. I decided to move to the Florida Keys with Noah for a year, far from the past's shadows. I wanted him to grow up seeing new horizons, unburdened by a family name scarred in our hometown. Before leaving, I donated my old house to the Savannah Senior Care Home that had supported my fight, offering an invisible shoulder when everything crumbled. The morning we set off for our new chapter. Standing on the dock with the sea breeze in my hair, I felt my life was no longer defined by pain or revenge, but by movement and rebirth. My true victory wasn't punishing them, it was reclaiming my peace and choosing my own path at last.